The night Celine Marsh decided she was done, the power went out in her building. Not a dramatic blackout with thunder and a story to tell, just the usual kind. The landlord hadn't paid the hydro bill again, and by 8 o'clock on a Tuesday in November, the whole east side of the Danforth was dark. She sat in her kitchen, with a candle she'd found in a drawer left by the previous tenant, and a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And she did what she always did when the numbers didn't work. She went through them again. The column on the left was what she owed. The column on the right was what she had. They hadn't met in the middle in 3 months. She was 31 years old, and she was very, very good with numbers. That was the problem. People who aren't good with numbers can tell themselves stories. Celine couldn't. She knew exactly how far she was from fine, and the distance was not closing. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Rourke. She let it ring. It buzzed again. Rowan. Work. She picked it up. The Delacroix account, he said before she could speak. No greeting. He never bothered. The reconciliation you filed on Friday. There's a discrepancy. There isn't, she said. Mr. Harrow says there is. Then Mr. Harrow should look at column D, row 47, and tell me what he finds. A pause. She could hear typing in the background, then silence. He says it doesn't matter, Rowan said finally. He wants you in the office tomorrow to explain it in person. Celine looked at the candle. The flame was steady. She'd learned to read rooms the same way she read ledgers, by what was out of place, what was off by even a fraction, what didn't balance. And Rowan's voice, right now, was off by quite a lot. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Another pause. Just be there at 9, she hung up. She sat in the dark for a while. Then she got out her laptop, opened the Delacroix file, and spent the next 4 hours going through every line of it, because she knew, with the certainty of someone who had been right about numbers her entire life, that whatever was happening tomorrow had nothing to do with row 47. The office of Harrow and Delacroix occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass tower on Bay Street, and it smelled, as it always did, like money that had been in the same hands for a very long time. Old carpet under new lighting. Art on the walls that nobody had actually chosen. It had simply arrived and stayed, the way certain kinds of power do. Celine had worked here for 2 years. She knew where the good printer was, which elevator ran slow, and that the coffee on the 15th floor was better than the 14th because someone had quietly replaced the machine 3 months ago and never told anyone on the floor below. She noticed things like that. She noticed most things. She noticed, when she walked in at 8:53, that Rowan wasn't at his desk. She noticed that the 2 junior analysts who normally waved at her were both looking very hard at their screens. She noticed that Harrow's office door was closed, and that the frosted glass had a shadow in it that was too large to be Harrow alone. She knocked anyway. Come in. Harrow was behind his desk. He was a small man who had learned, over the decades, to make himself seem larger by filling rooms with quiet. The kind of quiet that made other people want to fill it, and then regret that they had. He was good at it. Celine had never particularly fallen for it, which she suspected was why he'd never quite liked her. The other man was standing at the window. He was not small. He was the kind of tall that takes up space without effort, and he was wearing a dark coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he was looking out at the lake with his back to her, and she had the immediate, specific sense that this was not accidental. Mrs. Marsh, Harrow said. Sit down. She sat. This is Mr. Callum, Harrow started. Rourke, the man at the window said, without turning around. Just Rourke. His voice was the kind that had been trained, somewhere along the line, to carry without being raised. She heard it land in the middle of the room and stay there. Mr. Rourke has concerns about the Delacroix reconciliation, Harrow said. I explained the reconciliation to Rowan last night, Celine said. He explained it to me, Rourke said. He turned then. She got her first look at his face. Mid-40s, maybe, with the kind of jaw that gets described as strong in novels and in reality just means someone has learned to hold their teeth together under pressure. There was a scar along his left temple, thin, old, not something that had been stitched neatly. He was looking at her with the focused, specific attention of someone who had spent a great deal of time reading people, and had stopped finding most of them interesting. Your explanation was correct. Celine looked at Harrow. Harrow looked at his desk. Then why am I here? She said. Because, Rourke said, and he moved away from the window in that unhurried way that large men sometimes have, as if the room would simply wait for them. Harrow found someone else in column D, row 47 before you did, and I'd like to know who it is. The room went very still. Celine understood then. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Someone had put something in the Delacroix account that shouldn't have been there. She'd found it. She'd corrected it without flagging it, because she'd assumed it was a data entry error, because that's what it had looked like. But it wasn't an error. I don't know who it is, she said carefully. I believe you, Rourke said. He pulled out the chair across from Harrow's desk and sat in it, not because he'd been invited to, just because he'd decided to, and folded his hands on his knee. That's why you're still in this room and not in the lobby. Harrow made a small sound that Celine interpreted as discomfort with this entire situation. I need someone who can read what's in that account, Rourke said, and trace where it came from, and do it without telling anyone else what they're looking at. I work for Harrow and Delacroix, Celine said. Mr. Harrow and I have an arrangement, Rourke said. She looked at Harrow again. Harrow was still very interested in his desk. I don't do freelance, she said. I'm not offering freelance, Rourke said. I'm offering a contract. 3 months. Exclusive. The number is. He named a figure, and she kept her face entirely still, which took effort, because the number was the kind that had 2 commas and made the columns in her head rearrange themselves into something that looked, for the first time in a year, like they might eventually meet. In addition to which, he said, anything you find in that account that points back to whoever altered it, I want documented and delivered to me directly, and if I find something that points back to you, she said. There was a pause that she couldn't quite read. Then you'll have the documentation, he said, and I'll know I hired the right person. She told herself, on the cab ride home, that she was going to say no. She told herself this with the same conviction she'd told herself 3 months ago, that she was going to look for a better apartment, and 6 months ago that she was going to call her mother back, and a year ago that she was going to stop taking on extra work for Harrow because the extra work had never, in 2 years, translated into the raise he kept implying was coming. She was very good at telling herself things that didn't end up being true. She called Rowan. Who is Rourke? She asked. Rowan took a long time to answer. Someone Harrow doesn't say no to. It's all I've got, he said, and then, quieter, Celine, don't ask too many questions about this one. She hung up and looked out the cab window at the city, going grey in the November light, and she thought about the columns, the ones on the left and the ones on the right. She thought about how long it had been since they'd matched. She called Rourke's number. He'd left a card. Of course he'd left a card. It was plain white with just a number, the kind of card that communicates very efficiently, that the person handing it to you doesn't need to advertise. Yes, she said when he picked up. Monday, he said. Just that. And then he hung up. His office wasn't on Bay Street. It was in a converted building in the distillery district. Old brick, high ceilings, the kind of space that had once been industrial and now cost more per square foot than anything on Bay Street, precisely because it looked like it didn't. She found this out on Monday morning, when the address he'd texted led her past the tourist shops and the Christmas market stalls being set up in the cold, to a door with no sign on it, and a man outside it who looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has been told to expect her and is not particularly thrilled about it. His name, she would learn, was Declan. He didn't tell her that. She found it out from the way a second man addressed him when she was brought inside. Rourke's office was on the 3rd floor. The stairs were original, wide, wood, the kind that announce every step you take. She appreciated that. She appreciated things that made it difficult to approach without warning. He was at his desk when she came in. He didn't stand up. The files are on the drive, he said, and pointed to a laptop on the side table. You'll work here. No copies leave this building. I'll need access to the original Delacroix ledgers, she said. They're on the drive, the originals, not scans. He looked up at her then. She'd had 2 days to think about him, and in those 2 days, she'd decided that the most useful thing she could do was think of him as a client. A difficult client, the kind that doesn't read the paperwork and then acts surprised by the results, but a client. She'd had plenty of those. The trick was to be more certain than they were, and not let them see you working out the certainty. "I'll have them sent," he said. Today, and I'll need a desk with better light than that." A pause. He looked at the desk she was pointing to, which was, she had to admit, in a corner and somewhat dim. Then he looked back at her. "Declan," he said, without raising his voice. The man from downstairs appeared in the doorway. She had not heard him on the stairs. "Move the desk to the north wall," Rourke said. Declan moved the desk. She sat down and opened the laptop and started working. The first 3 weeks, she barely saw him. He arrived early and left late, and in between there were men who came and went from the building with a regularity that she quickly understood to mean that this was not, in any functional sense, an office. It was a hub, the kind of place where things were decided, not administered. The actual administration happened elsewhere, by other people, and only the things that couldn't be delegated made it to the 3rd floor. She focused on the accounts. What she found, by the end of week 2, was a series of transfers, small, careful, consistent, the kind that were designed to disappear into the noise of a large portfolio. Most accountants would have missed them. She didn't miss things. Each transfer had been coded to a subsidiary that, on paper, was dormant, and from there the money had gone somewhere that required a different kind of access to trace. She wrote it up. She brought it to Rourke on a Tuesday morning when he was alone in the office for the first time since she'd started, standing at his window again with his coat still on and a coffee he hadn't touched going cold on his desk. She recognized that, the untouched coffee, the coat still on, the signs of someone who has come in from somewhere difficult and hasn't quite arrived yet. She put the document on his desk. He read it without sitting down. He read it the way she'd noticed he did everything, without apparent hurry, but faster than you'd expect, the way someone reads when they already know roughly what they're looking for and are simply confirming. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "You're sure?" he said. "I don't bring you things I'm not sure of," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known it was internal?" "Since day 4, she said. "I needed the paper trail before I said anything." "Day 4, he said again. He said it with the tone of someone who is recalculating something. "Who else have you told?" "No one." She met his eyes. That was the arrangement. He picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "You should have flagged it sooner. I flag things when I can prove them," she said. "Not before." Another pause. "Most people I work with flag things before they can prove them." "Then you've been working with the wrong people," she said, and picked up her bag because she was done for the day, and she was not going to let him see that her hands were not entirely steady. She was at the door when he said her name. Not Miss Marsh. Her name. She turned. "The subsidiary," he said, "the one the money went to. Did you recognize it?" "No," she said, "but you wrote down the registration number." "I write everything down." He looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. "Go home," he said. "Come back tomorrow." She went home. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and somewhere in the 2nd month it stopped feeling like a contract and started feeling like something she didn't have a clean word for. She noticed the cold in the building before she noticed anything else. It was a Thursday in early December, and the distillery district was full of people who had come for the Christmas market, and the foot traffic and the lights outside made the building feel warmer than it was, until she climbed to the 3rd floor and realized the heat had gone out sometime in the night. She could see her breath. Rourke wasn't there. Declan wasn't there. The building was quieter than usual, which meant something had happened, though she didn't know what, and she had learned by now that the things she didn't know were often the things she was better off not asking about. She sat at her desk and worked because the deadline on the trace didn't move on account of the heat, and she wrapped her coat around herself and moved the space heater from the corner closer to the desk. And she was 3 hours in when she heard the stairs. not Declan's measured tread. Someone moving faster, heavier, slightly uneven. Rourke came through the door, and she knew immediately, without looking up from the screen, that something was wrong. The way he moved was different. Not the deliberate, unhurried quality she'd catalogued over 2 months. He was holding himself together, and doing it well enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. But she wasn't most people. She looked up. His jaw was set, and his coat was darker on the left side than the right. It took her brain a full second to understand that. "You're bleeding," she said. "I'm aware," he said, and sat down, not at his desk, but in the chair across from her, the one clients used, the one she'd never seen him sit in. "How bad?" she asked. "I've had worse." "That's not a measurement." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise. Left shoulder, went through the coat. Probably didn't go through much else. "Probably," she said. "Celine," he said, and her name in his voice had a different quality than it did on most days. "I need 20 minutes and somewhere to—" "There's a bathroom off the back stairwell," she said. She was already out of her chair. "First aid kit is under the sink. Sit down." "You don't have to. You just sat in the client chair," she said. "That means you're not the one making decisions right now. Sit." She didn't let herself think about it. That was how she'd gotten through most of the difficult things in her life, by making them procedural, by treating the problem as a column of numbers, identify the issue, find the relevant data, apply what you know, move to the next line. She found the kit. She came back. He had, against what she suspected were his usual instincts, stayed in the chair. The coat came off with effort and not much grace. The shirt underneath was ruined. She didn't say anything about that. She cleaned what needed to be cleaned and taped what could be taped, and her hands were entirely steady the whole time, which surprised her almost as much as everything else. He was quiet while she worked. That wasn't unusual for him, but this quiet was different, less deliberate, more exhausted. "This will need a doctor," she said. "Not today, but by tomorrow. I know people," he said. "I'm sure you do." A pause. "You're not asking." "Asking what? What happened?" "No," she said. She pressed a final piece of tape into place and stepped back. "I'm not." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Most of the expressions she'd catalogued were variations on careful. The face of someone who had learned that what you don't show is worth more than what you do. This one was something underneath all of that, and she didn't have a name for it yet. "Why not?" he said. She picked up the ruined shirt from the floor, folded it, set it on the side table, because her hands needed something to do. "Because what happened is your business," she said, "and because in 2 months of working here, I have filed 3 reports, identified 4 points of internal leakage, and traced $800,000 through 4 different dummy companies. And in all of that time, you have asked me exactly 0 questions about my life outside this building. So I extend the same courtesy." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was done talking. "You were cold when you came in," he said finally. She looked at him. "What?" "This morning. You were cold. You moved the heater before you sat down. I keep meaning to fix the furnace and He stopped. "I keep having other things." She didn't know what to do with that. She folded her hands and looked at the middle distance and said, "The heat comes back in the afternoon. The east wall gets enough sun. Not in December." "I've managed in worse," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite argument. He was still in the chair. She was still standing 3 feet away, and the space between them had something in it that she was very carefully not examining too closely. "The transfer documentation," he said. "The final report. How close are you?" 2 days, she said. "Maybe 3 if the last subsidiary is set up the way I think it is." He nodded. His eyes closed for a moment, just a moment, the involuntary kind, and she recognized that too, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for too long. "You should sleep," she said. "The back office has a couch. I'm aware of what's in the back office. Then use it, Celine." "Rourke." Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, a fraction of a degree, the way a column shifts when you correct a single entry and the whole thing suddenly balances. He looked at her with that focused, specific attention she'd gotten used to, and then he looked at her differently, and she knew the difference, and she felt it in her sternum. "Go to sleep," she said, and picked up her coat, and went back to her desk, and stared at the screen for 10 minutes before she remembered what she was supposed to be doing. He was still there in the morning. She hadn't expected that, had half expected to arrive and find the chair empty and everything set back to deliberate, because Rourke was a man who controlled what he showed, and she'd seen more of him yesterday than she suspected he'd intended. But the coat was on the hook by the door, and there was the sound of someone moving in the back office. And when he appeared in the doorway, his shirt was clean, and his face was composed, and his shoulder was clearly stiff under all that composure, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk without a word. She looked at it. "It's better than what you've been making," he said. She looked at the cup she'd already made on the corner table. She looked back at his. She picked it up. "The last subsidiary," she said. "I was right about how it's structured. It'll be 3 days, not 2. He sat down at his desk. "Take 4 if you need them." "I don't need 4, I know," he said. "That's why I said it." She drank the coffee. It was, in fact, better than what she'd been making. She made a note of that, not in any of the ledgers, just in the private running tally she kept of things she knew that she wasn't going to do anything with. The report was done on a Sunday, which was not a work day, but the numbers had resolved on Sunday, and she was not going to sit with a finished report until Monday just because of the calendar. She texted him, "Done. Building or digital?" His reply came in under a minute. "Building." She took the streetcar east through streets that were quiet the way. Only Sunday mornings in December are quiet. The sky the color of a promise nobody had made yet, and she went up the familiar stairs and into the familiar office, and found him there, which she'd expected, and found him not alone, which she hadn't. There was a man she didn't recognize sitting across the desk. He was about Rourke's age, with the look of someone who is used to being the most dangerous person in any room and has learned to be comfortable with it. He looked at her when she came in. Rourke looked at her. "Give us 10 minutes, he said. She went to her desk. She couldn't hear the conversation. They kept their voices low, and the building was good at holding sound. But she didn't need to. She'd worked out enough of the shape of Rourke's operations over 3 months to know that whatever was being settled in that conversation was not something that would show up in any ledger. After 10 minutes, the man left. He looked at her again on the way out, with the specific, assessing look of someone trying to determine what she knew, and she returned it with the blankness she'd perfected over 2 years at Harrow and Delacroix, which was to say, she looked at him the way she looked at numbers that weren't adding up yet, patiently, without alarm. Rourke came to stand at the edge of her desk. She handed him the report. He read it. The full thing, every page, standing there, and she watched his face and saw nothing in it except the slight adjustment at the corner of his jaw when he reached the part she knew was going to be the part that mattered. "You know who it is," she said. "Yes, since when? Since about 10 days ago." He set the document down. "I needed the paper trail." She stared at him. "You said that like..." She stopped. "You said that to me once." "I know." "You were confirming," she said, "this whole time. You were confirming something you already." She sat back in her chair. The particular feeling of that settled over her like something she should have seen in the columns weeks ago. "Who was in the meeting just now?" "Someone who needs to know what I know," he said, "and now knows it." She looked at the document on the edge of her desk. 3 months of work, $800,000 traced through dummy companies and dormant subsidiaries to a name she'd put in a box on the final page with the specific, careful neutrality of someone who has learned that the numbers don't care about the person, only the pattern. "Is this finished?" she said. "The contract." He didn't answer immediately, and she'd learned over 3 months that what Rourke didn't answer immediately was worth more than what he did. "The financial exposure is contained," he said. "What you documented closes the loop. That's not what I asked." He was quiet again. He was standing close enough to the desk that she could see the stiffness still in his left shoulder, better than 3 days ago, but not gone, not yet. "No," he said. It's not. She waited. There's a second account, he said. Smaller, more recent. And whoever set up the first one wasn't working alone. She should have said something practical then. She should have asked about the terms, the timeline, the rate for a second contract. All the things that a person who was treating this as a professional arrangement would ask. She said, "Is the heat on today?" He blinked, the closest thing to surprise she'd ever seen on him. "Yes." "Good," she said, and opened the laptop. "Then, show me the account." She didn't know when exactly it shifted, because things like that don't have clean timestamps, and she'd stopped pretending that she was going to find one. She knew that it was some time between the second contract and the third week of January, in the part of the year when Toronto goes grey and stays grey, and the cold is no longer interesting, just constant. She knew it had something to do with the afternoon he came back from whatever it was he never described in detail, and found her still at her desk at 7 in the evening, and said nothing, just set a paper bag from the tie place around the corner beside her keyboard without comment, and went to his own desk, and they both worked in the particular kind of companionable quiet that she had stopped trying to analyze. She knew it had something to do with the morning she overheard him through the door of the back office, handling a call in a voice that was different from every other voice she'd heard from him. Not softer, exactly, just less armored. The kind of voice you use when the person on the other end knows you well enough that the armor would be insulting, and how, when he came out, he saw her face and said, "My sister," by way of explanation, just that, and she'd said, "I didn't ask," and he'd said, "I know." And they'd looked at each other for a moment too long, and then both gone back to what they were doing. She knew it was already true. By February, when Declan handed her a set of keys with the expression of someone following instructions, he found mildly baffling and said that she'd be using the corner office from now on, for security reasons, which she understood meant that Rourke had decided she wasn't going home to the east side of the Danforth anymore, and hadn't found a way to say so that didn't sound like what it was. She moved in on a Thursday. Rourke was there when she arrived with 2 bags, and he helped her carry them upstairs without remarking on the fact that 2 bags was not very much for a person moving their life, which she appreciated, because it was not very much, and she'd spent enough time in the past year being aware of what she didn't have without someone else making an inventory of it. "The corner office is warmer," he said, when they'd set the bags down. "I noticed," she said. "The east wall gets sun in the afternoon." "You fixed it," she said. "I fixed the furnace," he said, "in December. I had Declan." He stopped. "You were cold." She looked at him. He was looking at the window, which had good light in it, the February kind, thin but real. She said, "I know." He turned and looked at her with that expression she'd named, eventually, though only to herself, the one that appeared when the armor didn't seem worth the effort. And she thought, with the particular clarity she got when a set of columns finally resolved, that she had been doing her own version of the same thing for longer than she was going to admit. "The second account," he said. "It closes next week." "I know," she said again. "After that, Rourke," she said. He stopped. "After that," she said carefully, "the numbers will still need someone who can read them." A pause. Outside, the city made the sounds it makes in winter, muffled, close, the sound of people moving through cold towards somewhere warmer. "Yes," he said. "They will." She put her bag down on the chair by the window. The sun came through the glass and landed on the floor between them, and she thought, this is what it looks like, the moment before the columns finally meet. Not dramatic, not announced, just 2 numbers arriving separately at the same line. "I'll need a better chair than this one," she said. And something in his face did the thing she'd been watching for months, the fraction of a degree, the slight adjustment, the shift, and she thought she might have been the first person to make him look like that in a very long time. "I'll have Declan get one," he said. "Today," she said, he said, and outside, quietly, without making a particular occasion of it, February kept going toward March.